Roads to Liberty presents The Guardians of Liberty with your hosts, Nathan Barada and Zach Taylor.
Oh, what a week we've had here in Nebraska. Since we recorded last week's episode last Thursday, Nebraska has lost its game to Northern Illinois and has fired its athletic director this afternoon. Sometimes I wish this was a sports show so we could just talk about Nebraska football all day. I mean, if there's one subject I can ramble on as much about as politics, it's definitely Nebraska football. But unfortunately, no, this is the political podcast. We're not going to talk all day about sports. But man, if it was ever a time to talk about sports instead in Nebraska, this would be the time. You watch a lot of football, Zach?
Yeah, Arsenal got a draw with Chelsea this last week, and we were on the road and supposed to lose that game. It was quite a nice surprise.
Yeah, I'm sorry I asked. I want to hear about your soccer. No one wants to hear about that.
It's football. Thank you.
You football? No.
Aren't you Puerto Rican? What's wrong with you?
I think Puerto Ricans like baseball, man, not soccer.
Everyone that's not an American likes soccer.
Yeah, well, I'm an American, so...
Oh, yeah, that I suppose.
Yeah, dude, I never lived in Puerto Rico. What are you freaking talking about?
I don't know. You said you were Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I'm Puerto Rican.
Is Puerto Rico technically part of America? I never know how that works.
It's a commonwealth is what it is.
I don't know what does that even mean.
Well, they don't get to vote. They don't have a representative. They don't pay federal taxes. But anyone born there is a natural-born citizen. So you don't need a passport to go there, and you don't need a passport if you're Puerto Rican to come to the States. That's pretty much how that works.
That kind of sounds wonderful.
It is pretty wonderful. If the Puerto Rican government weren't so tax-happy. We're getting way off what we were going to talk about. Hello, everyone. I am Nathan Parada, and I am your host for the Guardians of Liberty podcast, joined, as always, with Zach Taylor. And
what's up?
Yeah, what's up, Zach? And we have a special co-host today, Matt Maly. He is the operations coordinator for Nebraskans for an Alternative to the Death Penalty and was recently elected chair of the Candidate Recruitment and Legislative Awareness Committee, at the mouthful, for the Douglas County Libertarian Party. Matt, welcome. It's great to have you on.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Why does Douglas County have more committees than the state party? I feel like we should all just pack it in and let Douglas County just run everything. They seem to have a lot more going on.
Just because we have a lot of committees doesn't mean we're doing anything.
Well, I suppose.
Douglas County has more committees than most county parties have people.
That's probably true because I have 6 people that are all my friends.
You're all your friends. Well, we're all friends in liberty, right? So anyway, Matt, we had you on because you're a recent convert from the Republican Party. You were a Republican for many years, and it was just a couple months ago that you decided to make the switch to the Libertarian Party. So, what prompted you to make that switch?
Yeah, well, I don't know about many years. I'm not that old, but I did register Republican when I first registered to vote. I got involved in politics through Ron Paul, so he attracted me to the ideas of liberty and to getting involved with politics in general. And so at that time, the way to advocate for liberty was through the Republican Party. And at the time, I really think that was true. But I think something's really changed over that 5-6 years. So I just kind of saw that the liberty wing of the Republican Party was sort of on a downward trajectory. Still there, still doing good things, great people. Are certainly involved with the Republican Liberty Caucus and that sort of thing, but I saw a lot of growth in the Libertarian Party, especially here in Nebraska, and decided that that was something I wanted to be involved with, and that was probably the better avenue right now for advancing the causes that I care about. So I made the switch, 6 months ago or so, and haven't looked back.
Yeah, because I know for a lot of philosophical libertarians, when they're looking to get into the political ring, there's always that question, do you join the Republicans or the Libertarians? So when I moved to Nebraska, it was, I want to say about 3 years ago, I went to one of our first Tuesday for Liberty events, and there were a bunch of guys there from the Libertarian Party, a bunch of guys that I've grown to be friends with in recent years. And there were some guys there for the Republican Liberty Caucus who were trying to recruit people out of the LP into their caucus. So, being new, I just kind of wandered over to their event. I think they had a candidate forum with Chip Maxwell. And I learned pretty quickly that I didn't really want to be in the RLC because the meeting devolved into just a screaming match between.
I was at that meeting.
Oh, you were?
With Chip Maxwell? When you ran for Congress? Yeah, I was there.
Oh, I don't remember you. Well, I wouldn't have known you at the time.
I guess not.
Yeah, I remember it devolved into a screaming match between Ron Paul style Republicans and more traditional Republicans. Something about immigration. I think they were fighting about natural born citizenship. And it just got nasty real quick. And I felt sorry for poor Chip Maxwell up there because he's standing at the front of the room trying to answer questions in the most polite way possible while these people are just yelling at each other. I'm like, man, screw this. I don't need this kind of aggravation. I'm just gonna go over to the Libertarian Party where they aren't screaming at each other about silly things like this.
And then you went on the Libertarian internet and it ruined that for you.
Yeah, well, there's not. Libertarians in Nebraska, for the most part, don't tend to be this kind of vicious.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
If every other libertarian acted like a Nebraska libertarian, we would actually be winning elections right now.
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's something about the internet that brings out the worst in people, but I have the feeling that most people that just cry and moan online, they don't actually get out and do anything useful. They just like to cry online. So I guess that's for the best because they're the guys that don't start screaming matches in the middle of candidate forums. If they just stay online, then that won't happen, which I guess is a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so Matt, what did you do? What was your involvement in the Republican Party?
At first, I wasn't too terribly involved. Like I said, I got into it through Ron Paul. So I was a delegate to the Republican County Convention in 2012 to help elect Ron Paul slate to go on to the state and the national. Helped out with one campaign a little bit and, went to events sporadically. But I didn't get real involved until started working on the anti-death penalty campaign, anti-death penalty group. So I started that in January of 2015. Launched a group called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty here in a Nebraska chapter of that group, which is endorsed by Ron Paul. And part of that gig was just kind of getting involved with Republicans, getting to know Republicans. So started to serve on the Douglas County Republican Central Committee and went to, try to just be at different events and have a presence to advocate against the death penalty, which I think we'll talk about a little more later. But and to me, that's kind of the whole idea of being a libertarian Republican is that you get involved, you get to know people, and you try to ever so gradually move the party in a more libertarian direction. So that was kind of what I was trying to do, and a lot of it was just, showing up.
See, now that's interesting to me because I know a lot of Republicans are really, really hardcore for the death penalty. Governor Ricketts is one of those. I mean, how did run-of-the-mill Republicans react to your staunch anti-death penalty positions? Were they just kind of, oh, whatever, just go over there? Were they mean about it? Did they attack you about it, or how did that go?
Well, there certainly are some Republicans who support the death penalty, some fairly strongly, and that's sort of a lot of people think of that as kind of the traditional, if you're a Republican, you're supposed to be for the death penalty. But the thing is that a lot of Republicans have never really thought about why, and they've never thought about it as a broken and ineffective big government program, which is exactly what it is. So the reception I've had and continue to have as I talk with fiscal conservatives and Republicans in Nebraska and across the country is that they're very, very open to the idea. And when they consider the facts, a lot of Republicans are starting to look at the issue in a new light and are questioning the death penalty, at least, even if they're not necessarily to being a firm abolitionist. If they think of it as a big government program, and they say, even if I support it, I think we really need to think about how much it costs, how it's being carried out, and that kind of thing. What are the implications of having this kind of program? So a lot more Republicans in Nebraska and across the country are changing their mind on that issue. It's happening really quickly, and it's a pretty exciting thing to be a part of, I think.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably not going to be a quick question, long answer, probably. What is your opposition to the death penalty? Because there's a lot of arguments against the death penalty, and some of them are really good, and some of them are kind of really emotional. And what is your main argument for why we shouldn't have the death penalty?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different reasons for different people, and so there's really just there's not one answer, and so that's why when I'm talking to somebody, I always try to first ask them a question, like, what's your background with the death penalty, or have you ever given the death penalty much thought, or something like that, just to kind of hear where they're coming from. And sometimes they'll have a clue, like if they're really hardcore Catholic, if that's a big part of their life, their Catholic faith, then for a lot of them it's a pro-life issue, and they care about the 159 innocent people who have been exonerated from death rows across the country. If they're really hardcore Republican and they're all about fair tax and balanced budget and stuff like that, then I'm more likely to bring up that Nebraska's death penalty costs $14.6 million more than life without parole. So you can kind of take the fiscal angle. For other people, it's a moral issue. That the violence isn't the solution. For some people, they really care about the victims, and the death penalty is really hard on the victims' families, drags out the process, and so it's kind of a lot of different things to different people. And when it's sort of the combination of things, really, is the crux of the matter. Is that it'd be one thing if it costs more, but it really worked, and we had the drugs to carry it out and everything, then we would kind of accept that cost probably. Or it'd be one thing if innocents were sent to death row by mistake, but there were no alternative, and that was the only thing to be done, then we might have to accept that risk. But when you combine all these things, like, it's not the only option. It does risk innocent lives. It does cost more. It is hard on the victims. We don't have the drugs to carry it out. There's a better way of doing this and keeping society safe. When you put it all together, then almost everyone, if they really understand the facts, is going to be opposed to the death penalty.
So we studied this a lot because my minor is in criminal justice.
Oh yeah.
And we found that if you take all the other factors out, there's really not a difference between areas like capital crimes and areas where there is and isn't a death penalty. So I think, like, the frustrating part to me is you always have people that are like, well, it deters crime. Well, statistically it doesn't. And to me, that's the big thing that we have to overcome, is people really don't understand that it doesn't work. It
Right.
doesn't do what they think it does.
Yep. If it deterred crime, you would expect that the South, which is where over 80% of executions are done, would be the safest part of the country. But just the opposite is the case. Their murder rates there tend to be higher than average. And if you look at, one way I like to look at that is borders. So like New Hampshire, for example, is a death penalty state, but New Hampshire is a pretty small state. And if somebody were to drive a few miles to the west and commit their crime in Vermont, there's no death penalty there. A little bit to the east is Maine, no death penalty. A little to the south is Massachusetts, no death penalty. A little to the north is Canada, no death penalty. And so if it's not capable of deterring murder even to another state, then how could you expect it to deter murder altogether? And the fact of the matter is it doesn't. We know that there's no extra deterrent value to the death penalty over and above life without parole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for libertarians, there's really two main areas of this debate. One, the moral concern, and two, the practical concern. Because for me, I've never had a moral objection to the death penalty. Some people have committed crimes that are so egregious that I wouldn't have any moral opposition to them being put to death for it. And I think we can all think of some people who think, oh yeah, that person's evil enough to be put to death. It's more the practical argument that got me on this side of the issue. And it took me a while to get there because I always had that argument in my head. Oh, what if you have a really, really crappy person that just needs to be put down? But I guess when you look at the practical application, see how much it costs to see, just how much time and energy and resources are poured into putting one person to death, and they sit in jail for years and years and years, and I'm not willing to sacrifice, all the appeal processes that go into that, because that just would make it easier to put an innocent man to jail. And I'm sorry, I'm not willing to risk putting an innocent man to death just to save a few bucks. That's not a good alternative to me. So I guess when you look at the practical argument about it, take in for instance the fact that it costs more to put somebody to death than to just lock them in a cell for the rest of their lives, then I think, even if there is somebody that's really awful that really should be put to death, just the practical cost alone is probably a good enough reason to get rid of the death penalty anyway.
Sure.
That's how I came to this conclusion.
Yeah, to a libertarian, it's the epitome of a wasteful and ineffective, broken big government program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't even trust the government to fill the dabbling potholes. How in the world could I trust them with something like choosing life and death of its own citizens? So to me, with my perspective on government, and this, by the way, is what really helps us as we have these conversations with Republicans, is that they share, at least most of them, share this idea of government, that they don't expect government to be perfect. They expect it to be far from it. So, if I'm talking to a Republican, I would tell them, hey, to me, knowing, with my experience in line at the DMV, it comes as no surprise that the government is so incapable of carrying this out, that they don't have the drugs, that they waste millions of dollars, that they screw it up so often and say, whoops, we got the wrong guy. I guess he was innocent after all. To me, that comes as no surprise, because that's what government does with everything they stick their thumb into. They screw up healthcare, they screw up education, they screw up the roads, they screw up everything they do. And so I think we should give them only the roles that they absolutely have to have. And this is just not something that the government needs to be in the business of, killing their own citizens. They're going to screw it up anyway, so we may as well put them in prison for the rest of their lives. That way, when a mistake is made, we can let them out.
Yeah, you would think that people who have a natural, distrust of government would be more inclined to come to this position. Because libertarians, almost to a man, just have a natural inclination to distrust anything the government does, and a lot of Republicans and conservatives share that. So I guess to say that that's a starting point for a lot of Republicans, that you can bridge the gap there and get them to see our side of the issue.
Yeah, and even if they support the program in theory, they still ought to be skeptical of it. I sometimes tell Republicans, there's nothing more patriotic than a healthy skepticism of government. And so even if you support the death penalty, that's fine, but you ought to know the facts. You ought to really look into it. So even the aspects of government that I do support, because I'm a libertarian, but I'm not an anarchist, right? I believe that we need the government to do, police and roads and basic things like that. But even in those departments, we still got to do audits. We still got to make sure that there's absolutely no better way those things could be being done. We still have to be keeping an eye on our elected officials. And so to me, almost the more egregious thing than say in the Nebraska legislature voting to keep the death penalty, several years prior, well, it's been a while now, 2010, I guess, there was a bill just to do a study to see, now since there has been a study, but at the time to do a legislative study to see how much the death penalty costs. And so to me, to vote against that, that's even, that's really like hard to call yourself a conservative. Even if you support the death penalty, that's fine. But to say I don't even want to look into what the government's doing with my money, that's really problematic, I think, and sort of hypocritical if you call yourself a Republican.
So first off, I'm triggered. How dare you bring up roads?
Oh, sorry.
More
We
roads?
talk about roads?
No, we don't need roads. I have a Jeep, so I don't need roads.
Hey, I got a Jeep too.
Yeah.
But mine's kind of falling apart at the moment, so it could use some roads.
Okay.
It's not an off-roading condition.
So I'm going to make what I think is the best devil's advocate argument here.
Sure.
Having been in basic training, which I'm told is very much like being in prison, I can't imagine spending my entire life in that kind of an environment. So I think that there is something to the argument that life in prison is almost more cruel than the death penalty itself. What would be your response to that?
Well, a lot of people say that, and honestly, a lot of people, that's their reason for opposing the death penalty. Because I think most of us would agree that when these terrible crimes happen, they ought to pay the highest price. They ought to have a penalty, a difficult punishment. And so, yeah, there's something to be said. I don't know. I've never been on death row. I've never been in prison. It's difficult for me to compare the two. Obviously, nobody can really do that except for the guys who have been in both positions, which some people have. But yeah, life without parole is a hard thing. And if you've committed an egregious, terrible murder, you ought to face a harsh sentence, and you ought to have to deal with that guilt every day of your life. And ideally, you would be able to, in some form, pay some restitution, in some way. Maybe that's working some sort of job while you're incarcerated and sending money to the victims' families. There are some programs along those lines. But if they just kill the guy, then he doesn't have to wake up every morning and deal with that guilt.
I guess there's not a lot of restorative justice if you don't give them a chance to do something for the victim and the family. That is a good point.
And to make themselves better. I mean, this isn't necessarily something that would play well with a whole lot of people, but to me, I'm an evangelical Christian, at least used to be. I'm a Christian, love Jesus, and I'm all about grace and mercy, And there's a story in Georgia where this woman's on death row she didn't actually kill anybody, but she hired the murder of her husband. Yeah. And it's a terrible, awful thing. But she was so remorseful, and her life totally changed. And she actually got some kind of a theology degree while incarcerated, and she became this deeply religious woman who actually spoke into the lives of the people around the cells around her through the air vents. And there were a whole number of women who said, she kept me from committing suicide, and she totally changed my life around. She decided that by speaking to me through the air vents, and she decided she was going to make something good of her life. And so her children, which would be also the children of her victim, because it was her husband that she had killed. So the family of the victim was saying, please don't kill our mother. We've already lost our father. Our mother is now remorseful. She's totally changed her life. She's doing good in the world. She's helping other people. Please don't kill her. And the state did it anyway. So it's just like, who does that help? And even if that's 1 out of 100 people who really have a drastic change like that and try to do some good with their lives and really are repentant and remorseful and whatnot, even if that's 1 out of 100, to me, it's like, it's worth saving them and giving them a second chance, because people can change. I believe that people are better than the worst they've ever done. If you lie, you're more than a liar. If you cheat, you're more than just a cheater. And even if you kill, you're more than a killer. That can't define you. That's my personal belief. Again, that's kind of a moral thing, and that is influenced by my religion more than my politics. But I think there's something to be said for that people can't change.
As much as we want to talk about there being a separation between church and state, religion is so, like, your personal faith informs so much of who you are.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have one, that still informs a lot of who you are.
Yeah.
kind of on the same vein of what you were just talking about, one of the things, I used to be kind of a pastor, like I was an intern. I was training to be a pastor.
Okay.
And one of the things that got me out of wanting to go into ministry was this topic, because I understand the logical argument behind the death penalty. I think this comes down to you can't possibly trust the government to do it correctly, but I understand the logic. But to me, it is impossible to be a follower of Christ and not have a sense of wanting to see someone better themselves past their mistakes. Because, the New Testament is nothing but teaching us to overcome the worst things that we've done. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah. And there's, I got a bumper sticker on my car. It says, "Who would Jesus execute?" Right? And there's this cool story, right? When Jesus is faced with a woman being stoned, and he says, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And the cool thing about that, to me anyways, what that sort of demonstrates is that the only one, because Jesus is the only one without sin, right? In that setting, the only one who has any authority to execute that woman has absolutely no desire to do so, And so, and in the Old Testament, that tells me a lot about the heart of God. In the Old Testament, even when they had that death penalty system, God specifically intervened and demonstrated mercy in a number of cases. So, David committed a capital crime, and Moses and Paul, many of the biblical heroes would be executed, if Republicans today had their way. And so, God is a God of mercy. My God is, anyway. And I think, the vast majority of religious traditions oppose the death penalty. So when this was on the ballot, we were working with evangelical leaders and the Catholic Conference, and all different mainline Protestant traditions, and even Buddhists and Jews and Muslims, wide variety of different faith traditions. Almost all of them are formally opposed to the death penalty. There's just a tiny little handful that accept it, and so that I think says a lot. Also, if you support the death penalty and you go to church, odds are you disagree with your church about the death penalty. So maybe you should give it some thought.
Yeah, that'd probably go on a bumper sticker pretty well.
I mean, probably.
So you disagree with your church? Yeah, talk to your pastor about this.
All right, as well as being an opponent of the death penalty, you're also a minimalist. And I wanted to talk a little bit about minimalism because I think this is a very interesting subject for libertarians to talk about. There's a very bad stereotype that a lot of people have of libertarians of just being soulless, cold-hearted materialists. That all we're interested in are profits and money and stuff.
We're all rich, greedy white guys.
Oh yeah, that's the stereotype, and it only takes going to a Libertarian Party meeting to see that that's not anywhere close to being the truth. But we're
mostly hippies.
There are definitely some hippies among us. But here, Matt is an honest-to-God minimalist, which is the complete opposite of that negative stereotype. So Matt, tell me a little bit about that. How do you reconcile your libertarian philosophy with your minimalist lifestyle?
Well, that's a big question. So yeah, I'm definitely minimalist. As we speak, I'm sitting in my 89 square foot home that I built myself, with at least some recycled materials and some materials out of dumpsters and off of the Craigslist free page and stuff. And so it's tiny. It's less square footage than a roll of toilet paper, but it's everything I need, and I'm totally happy in it. And so yeah, to me, I mean, I'm a libertarian. It's got nothing to do with wanting more stuff. I'm just the opposite. I'm a libertarian because I care about people. I care about the disadvantaged, less fortunate. I like to describe myself as a bleeding heart libertarian because I care about social justice. I care about the least of these, and I see the government as a leading oppressor. That they have very little capacity to help people and incredible capacity to ruin people's lives. So that's why I'm a libertarian, is because I care about people and not so much the stuff. I don't know if that really answered that question, but it just doesn't have to go together. You don't have to want to be a consumerist in order to get the government out of people's lives. It just doesn't have to go together.
Yeah, I think where this stereotype stems from is a lot of non-libertarians think Ayn Rand is the goddess of libertarianism, and anything she says is the Bible for every libertarian.
Didn't she hate libertarians?
No, she hated anarcho-capitalists, is what she hated. She didn't like anarchists. But, I mean, I like Ayn Rand. I'm not, I wouldn't call myself an objectivist, but I like her books. I think for what she is, she's incredible in certain issues and, pretty good in most issues. But yeah, there's this idea that she's the god of libertarianism, and she is a lot like that, but that stereotypical materialist that people complain about. That's just one wing of the libertarian philosophy. Objectivism isn't the end-all, be-all of libertarians. It's just one specific portion. There's a whole lot of different kinds of libertarians, and Matt's one of them. You don't have to be a materialist, and being a laissez-faire capitalist does not make you a materialist, and it doesn't mean you're a greedy idiot who just wants to screw over the poor. Libertarians simply believe that laissez-faire capitalism is the most moral system because it does not require the initiation of force against peaceful individuals, and it is the most effective system because free individuals willingly making trades with one another is going to lead to far superior outcomes than government forcing people to act in certain ways.
Yeah, so there's whenever you have an increase in technology, which is bound to happen when you have deregulation or whatnot. There's competition, there's innovation, whatever, all that great stuff about the free market. And there's basically two possibilities. You can either use that as a society to work the same amount and have more, or you can have the same amount of stuff, of quality of life, what have you, and work less. And basically throughout history, we've always chosen to have more. So we're having we have bigger and bigger houses, bigger and bigger cars, more and more gadgets and technology and all this crap that people think they need. But the 40-hour work week has remained standard. But if we had used all those increases in technology, if you wanted to live at, say, a 1950s quality of life, which really in the grand scheme of things wasn't that bad. If you had a 1950s style home, which was an average of about 1,000 square feet, about half of what it is today. And most people a lot of people anyway, didn't own cars then, especially if they lived in the city. And if you didn't have TV and you didn't have a dishwasher, you wash the dishes by hand, whatever, you could probably do that on, a part-time job today and live a pretty good life. But instead, we've always chosen to achieve a quote unquote higher quality of life by having more stuff and working the same amount. But really that's not the inherent, it's not tied to the production that's going to come from free markets. Free markets can either produce a lot cooler and better stuff, or they can produce the same stuff at reduced costs. Right. Mm-hmm. So like people always talk about cell phones. Like it's so great that we have free markets because back in the day, you got a phone, it was black. They were all the same. But now we've got all this competition. You can get a million different cell phones with all these different features. But even cooler than that to me is that any Joe Schmo, if you don't want all those features, you can go and get a cell phone that makes calls and texts for $15. That was unheard of, 20, 30 years ago. So that's the cool thing to me about free markets is that they bring costs down. Again, helping the least of these, a disadvantage.
I think we forget that argument way too much. That should be something that we push a lot more because we always make the argument that the poor are, poverty is relative in America, that most of the people who are poor aren't really poor when you compare what their life is really like. And I say this as someone who's been below the poverty line most of my adult life.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best times in my life were times where I was living in basically a one-room apartment when I was in the military, and I didn't have a lot of stuff. So instead of having stuff to distract me, I had to have friends. And I think something that we're losing as humans is friends and spending time with people and building relationships, because we have so much stuff that it distracts us. And, this is the social media guy for the LPNE sitting here saying maybe we should get off social media a little more and spend a little more time face-to-face with people. And I think when we surround ourselves with material goods, we can forget important things because, we still have those lizard brains that want resources and to gather all these things, but not everything that has value in our life has monetary value. Like, there's other things that are important.
And not only does it not help us, but I would argue that it really harms us. One of the leading causes of depression and it's natural and suicide, not natural and, but can lead to that, is credit card debt. That's a leading cause of divorce in this country as well. There's so many people who are stressed out, buying all this crap they don't need. Look at Black Friday. I mean, people mauling each other for all this crap, and they're waiting in line, for hours and hours and hours instead of spending time with their kids. And so not only is it not helping us, but I think it's really doing us harm. It's tearing away from the family time and just experiencing life. I was at this thing like a week ago, and it was at a college, and they were promoting this event they were doing. I forget what they called it. No, they call it Disconnect. It's at Nebraska Wesleyan, and they were challenging students to go 24 hours without electronics, without their phones and laptops and whatnot. And they were saying, if you can't do, I know 24 hours is like really, really hard. If you can't do that, just do 1 hour. Even that's going to be hard, but you can do it. And I was just kind of like rolling my eyes thinking, really? Have we gotten to the point where it's a challenge to go 60 minutes with your phone off? Like, we're really missing out on a lot that life has to offer if that's the case. Yeah. So.
And these were school kids?
Yeah, this was some kind of event, and more power to them for encouraging the college students to do this. And then they were going to have like events around campus. So they're going to do like a yoga and whatever. The idea being, when you're off your phone, go meet people, get involved in stuff, whatever, and have this face-to-face interaction, which was great. But then, I talked to a couple of the other students. They were like, "Oh, no way, I can't do that. I don't have time for that." So
my family, like my dad, my brothers, and I are slowly buying up a mountain in Tennessee, or just like one plot of land at a time. When I get to go down and visit, we're making a compound. We're going to survive the end times.
Is this like in you said Tennessee?
Yeah, it's in the Smoky Mountains.
Like in the Great Smoky Mountains? Okay, that's a really cool area.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Go on.
Whenever I go down there to visit, because my brother and my dad live on all this land, I just have my land that I haven't done anything with yet. Whenever I go down there and visit, it's on a mountain. There's no cell phone reception. Their internet is really expensive. It's really slow, and there's a cap on how much they can use. So we don't get on the internet when we're down there. We barely watch TV. We'll watch a movie at night sometimes. And going down there, turning everything off, and waltzing through the woods with a machete, clearing out debris and finding game and just all these things that are kind of primal. I always come back feeling much better. And I at first I thought, I'm seeing my family, and there's probably something to that. But I think the biggest thing is I don't check my phone when I'm down there.
Yeah.
There's always something. I mean, I don't know if I could be a minimalist, but I definitely am somebody that likes to live with less stuff. Like I'm always talking to my wife about downsizing because I hate clutter. Like you pointed me to a documentary on Netflix called Minimalism. And immediately after watching that, I looked around me and thought, man, I can get rid of so much stuff. And I just started taking stuff off of shelves and putting them in boxes. My wife comes out of the bedroom and goes, what the hell are you doing? She looks at the TV and sees the title Minimalism. She's like, oh, I see. You watched that. You just watched a documentary about minimalism, and now you want to get rid of all your stuff. But yeah, it does have a feel because, like, for me, I just don't like clutter. And the more stuff I have, the more clutter just naturally accumulates. So getting rid of stuff just makes me feel better because if I see clutter, it gets me stressed out. And when I'm stressed out, I don't have the best attitude. And when I don't have the best attitude, I'm getting my wife on edge. My son can pick up on that.
Definitely.
It's a negative atmosphere when that stuff is going on. And, I always feel a lot better when I get rid of stuff. It's like a therapy almost because I just feel better. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm the kind of person, I hate cleaning, so I keep saying, well, we need to downsize. But I remember being really poor so many times in my life that having things has this deep-rooted emotional value to me that I need to let go of. And that's one of the reasons I was excited to talk about this, because I need to have less, because I clutter myself up and get super stressed out.
Yeah, it's quite a tendency in America today. It's hard you have to be really intentional, to avoid where we're advertised to so much. And I always try to remind myself in this, like, when I have kids someday, I'm going to, make a point of just, being annoying and telling them this whenever commercials come on TV. Like, remember, that's a total lie, And we all kind of know that intellectually. But we have to remind ourselves whenever we're looking at advertising, the whole point of that is to lie to you, mm-hmm. And some of it's really, really, sometimes I just roll my eyes at the garbage that they try to tell you. If I drink this brand of beer, girls are just going to be flocking to me. If I drive this kind of car as opposed to this kind of car, I'll have the greatest road trips and experience freedom. If I wear this brand of socks as opposed to that brand of socks, I'll be happy and healthy, and all this riches are going to come to me from a brand of socks. The whole point of advertising is to convince you that the key to happiness is their particular brand of merchandise. Mm-hmm. And that's a flat out lie 100% of the time, and it's garbage. And so we have to remind ourselves of that, and we have to again and again and again remember that these ads are lying to us, because everybody says, oh, I don't buy Pepsi instead of Coke because of the ads, right? Mm-hmm. We all say that, or I don't vote for this guy as opposed to this guy because of the TV commercials. But, millions and millions of dollars are spent on commercials. Obviously, they work. It's subconscious. We don't realize how it's affecting us, but it does affect us in significant ways. And as you can tell, when brands get these lines, for hours and hours for the new release of their phone or whatever, those advertising people are sitting in their offices smiling. Look, we convinced them. We convinced all these schmucks that they're going to be happy if they buy our $700 phone instead of somebody else's $15 phone that does practically the same thing. Mm-hmm. Look how great we did. We convinced the fools, So there's so much that you're up against. I think we have to be really, really intentional in this society to say, no, that's not true. That's not happiness. I want more out of life than just going to work 40 hours a week and going shopping on the weekends. I want more out of life than that. I'm not going to stoop to that level and waste my life away in shopping malls. Yeah.
I mean, my marketing professor always told me that that marketing is about selling hope. Sure. And on some level, I think that you can have good like if you have a good product, it is okay to sell hope. But that concept is also used, by the sock company, the shoe company, the beverage company. These things are going to make your life better. And that's the hope that we hold on to, because, that lizard brain. But it's important to step back and be like, why do I want, Pepsi over Coke? For me, that's because Coke is a battery cleaner, not a soft drink. But it's really like every 2 years I upgrade to the newest Samsung phone. And this next time when my contract is up, I'm going to downgrade, because this phone doesn't do anything that the last phone didn't do that I use it for. So why am I doing this? Because someone told me I needed to.
Yep. And that's, I bought a computer not all that long ago, and the very first computer I bought was $250. It was a netbook, so it was a smaller screen or whatever. And so it was lasted me, I don't know, several years. Not all that long, actually, because it dropped it down the stairs. And anyway, so it was like several years later when I had to replace it. And of course, by then, I could get all these fancy new features, for $250. But I thought about it and decided, if they hadn't invented all those extra megapixels in the webcam or whatever, I wouldn't need it, like I'm just fine with this computer. It had all the fine features and it met my needs. The only reason I would want that junk is because I've seen it advertised. But if it hadn't been advertised, I wouldn't even have the desire for it. So instead, I decided to get something with similar specs. And like I was saying before, the beauty of free markets and competition is that just 2 or 3 years later, I could get the same hard drive size, the same memory and screen size, and all the same features as my old laptop for $150. It was like $100 cheaper for the same specs just a couple of years later. So again, that's the beauty of free markets. If government doesn't regulate, we have competition. We can have cooler, better stuff, or we can have the same stuff, be just as happy, and have it way, way cheaper. So that's that many fewer hours that I have to work at some job. Because that's another thing. I'm always thinking, time and money. I always compare things like to my hourly rate. Like if I'm going to pay for parking or something, like, well, I can make this much per hour, if I walk this many blocks. I'm always doing those figures because I'm a geek. And and so it's like, if I can get $100 cheaper computer and it's got specs that I'm still happy with, that's that many hours, without saying my salary, that I can that I get to have with my family, that I get to, do things that really matter, sitting around campfires telling stories or playing games or, stuff that I enjoy. So,
I found
the cost of goods. That's what it's all about to me, libertarianism.
Yeah. The computer that I'm running was like $2,500 when I got it, because I built this thing for high-end video gaming, and now I use it to record podcasts. So,
well,
maybe should have done something a little different. But I spent $150, well, let's say about $200 on D&D stuff, and I play D&D 3 nights a week at least.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the highlight of my week, is sitting down with my fiance, my best friends. We might get some alcohol. We might just hang out and play Dungeons and Dragons and not even really follow the rules that much. And so much cheaper and so much more enjoyment.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're running against time here, but I did want to ask one more question before we finish. Matt, so you're part of the minimalist community. What would you say in general is the political bend of most minimalists? Do they tend liberal, conservative? Are they libertarians like you? What's the general feel that you have?
Well, that's a whole other thing, so I'll try not to go into too much detail about it. But minimalist is a pretty broad term, right? Tiny house people is a little bit easier to define, I guess. People who live in small homes. Obviously, then you have to decide what's small home. But I'm going to this festival actually this weekend outside of Des Moines, tiny house gathering, and the people there have been to these in the past, and the people there will be definitely bent towards the left. It's kind of tends to be a liberal demographic, and where that's becoming a problem is that on the political side of things, some people want to add to the building codes to allow for tiny houses, and I'm kind of like, no. The problem is too many building codes. We want to take away from them to allow for tiny houses. But anyway, a lot of people, they care for the environment and whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. I got liberal friends, and I don't have anything against Democrats in general. I mean, I disagree with them politically, but so you'll find in general, I think tiny house people and people who sort of emphasize anti-consumerism tend to be on the left side of the spectrum. But to me, it totally fits with libertarianism. It totally makes sense. It's efficient. It's self-sufficient. It's doing your own thing. I built my house on wheels specifically so that I would get around building codes. So this guy was helping me build it. I remember asking him, he said, like, how high do you want your light switch? And I said, well, I don't know. Is there some standard? And he said, well, the building code is, I don't forget what it was, 40 inches or something like that. And I said, well, that seems a little high. I said, why is that? And he said, well, it's so that little kids can't reach it. That's why they have it in the code. And I'm like, well, there's no little kids living in this house. I'm a single guy. I don't have little kids. So obviously that's not relevant. So I put it a few inches below. So that wouldn't have passed inspection. But I built it for the occupant, so that's just common sense to me. Like, well, yeah, you'd want to be safe. If you had little kids, you wouldn't want to mess up with the lights. But if there's no little kids, then who cares, right? Yep. So yeah, to me, it's totally libertarian. Build to your own needs, live simply, and it's just it's so much more efficient, and it's a cheaper, better way to live, and to me, that's libertarianism. And there's a humanitarian aspect too, that we can help, we can build little houses for people in need, as opposed to giving them government subsidized low-income housing, which is a disaster and almost never works. But again, that's a whole other thing. So.
Do you ever get any weird looks from people in minimalist circles when you tell them you're a libertarian? Because like I said, that goes against the stereotype a lot of people have. Like, what? Wait a minute, you're a libertarian? Doesn't that mean you have to be a greedy, corporatist, materialist? Do you ever get that reaction?
To be honest, it doesn't come up all that often. Most tiny house people are pretty friendly, and we like each other. We kind of have a bond. Yeah, so I can't say anybody's ever been bothered or upset or anything, or even surprised, but I don't know, if it just rarely wouldn't really come up. So yeah.
Well, excellent. I think that's all the time for that we have right now. Me and Zach, we're gonna wrap this up with tell everybody about some upcoming events. But Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us today. It was a pleasure having you on.
You bet. Had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Maybe we'll have to do this again sometime. But I do want to talk more about this minimalism, because it's a fascinating topic for me, and we'd love to have you on again sometime. But yeah, thanks for coming, and have a good night. It was a fascinating conversation. I'm really glad we were able to have Matt on the show to talk to him about death penalty and about minimalism. But now we have to talk about upcoming events. I know we have an event coming up this Saturday for Laura Ebke. We're doing weekly literature drops for Laura Ebke in her district. What we're basically doing is volunteers are taking rack cards and hanging them from people's doors. And this weekend we have a event coming up in Thayer County. Now that's on the southwest portion of her district. That's right on the state border with Kansas.
Oh, wow.
That's coming out. That's going to be at 9 a.m. this coming Saturday. The meetup place is going to be in Byron, Nebraska. If you live in Lincoln or Omaha, carpooling will be available. Please just visit the Libertarian Party of Nebraska Facebook page and find the event page for the literature drop. And we've said before, this is incredibly important that we make sure Senator Ebke gets reelected. So
she has an opponent now, so now we have to really up our game.
She does. The governor is bringing all the heat up against the Libertarian Party now. So we got to show them that we're not pushovers. We will fight back, and we will win.
Yeah. Her opponent is one of those aforementioned pastors that support the death penalty. I don't quite understand that.
All I need to know is that Ricketts is pushing hard against Senator Ebke, which tells me that all this backing that we're giving her is worth it. Because if
somebody's scared.
If the governor is this upset with her, then that just makes me even happier with the job she's been doing. So I
think what the problem is if you look at conservative principles, she's actually a conservative. Like, she's a libertarian, but she's really what conservatives care about are things that she has a record of standing up for. Ricketts is not. He's a big government Republican, and I think it's really threatening to him to have someone who's a better Republican than him in another party showing him up.
Exactly. Let's not mince words here. The Libertarian Party has permanent ballot access here in the state. It's the only party that is currently growing. It's a threat. The Libertarian Party is a threat to the Republican dominance in this state. And if Laura Ebke wins, then...
When Laura Ebke wins.
When Laura Ebke wins, that'll send a message to legislatures, not just in the state, but across the nation, that joining the Libertarian Party is not a death sentence. You can win as a Libertarian, and that is what this race is going to prove.
Mm-hmm.
And once that message is sent, once that is proven, then Republican dominance in this state will be on shaky grounds.
Yeah. Once there's a hole in the dam, it's going to fall apart at some point.
Exactly, especially if they keep putting up people like Pete Ricketts as their standard bearers.
Yeah. At some point, the Republicans are going to have to start putting up like semi-decent human beings to run for office because Ricketts doesn't pass that test.
Ricketts is just a guy with a lot of money and a ball. That's all he is.
And he's a Cubs fan. I mean, really.
In Nebraska. How dare he? Right. We also have a leadership meeting on, what is it, the Sunday afterwards?
Yep. That's going to be, we have the major planning event that is in Lincoln, Sunday, October 1st at 2 p.m. It is at the Lauren Corey Isley Library. What that is supposed to be is the leadership for Senator Ebke's campaign is going to go over canvassing strategies, volunteer strategies, things that she needs from volunteers, and that'll be a really good way for you to get involved. If you're like me and the idea of walking around a town handing people things is terrifying, there will be other ways that you can get involved. Like we did parades, which was also kind of terrifying for me, but I did it. And there's a lot of things like that you can kind of come out of your shell, find a way to help. They will help you find ways to spread liberty, and that's really important. We're winning. We're taking ground. We cannot let up now.
Absolutely. This is a must-win race, and I have no doubt that Senator Ebke is up to the challenge. The question is, are the rest of us going to give her the help that she needs?
Yeah. We're not going to get a candidate that's better than Senator Ebke. She's a rock star. If we can't get her reelected, that says something about us, not her.
Exactly. So I'm gonna be there. I hope you're gonna be there. I hope to see as many libertarians as we can possibly get there. And you know what? If you need a ride from Omaha, I am more than willing to provide one. So yeah, go on the Libertarian Party of Nebraska Facebook page, find that event. If you need a ride from Omaha, just leave a message on there. I'll see it. I'll message you back. Make sure that you got a ride there. But yeah, like I said, this is a must win, and we will win it. We will do whatever it takes to get Senator Ebke reelected.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's all I have for tonight. How about you, Zach? You have anything else you want to say?
No. Good episode. I really like the conversation.
Exactly. All right. So for us here at Guardians of Liberty, thank you for stopping by and giving us a listen. You have a good one. Good night.
Good night, everybody.